When workers broke ground on an underground parking lot in the heart of Rome 15 years ago, they had no idea what their backhoes were about to unearth. The site turned out to be what Italian archaeologists believe was once the pleasure gardens of the Roman Emperor Caligula, where some 2,000 years ago all sorts of lavish parties, royal intrigue, and debauched behavior likely took place. Caligula became the third emperor of Rome in 37 AD, and he reigned for barely 4 years. He's been portrayed in history as one of the most deranged and despicable Roman emperors ever to rule. But for years, scholars have been re-examining parts of Caligula's story to see if history has it right. Could we discover some new fragments of truth in Caligula's gardens? We were more than happy to go to Rome to find out.
The temples and palaces of ancient Rome may have crumbled long ago, but the legend of one of its oddest emperors lives on.
Down on your knees, all of you! Bend your heads! I shall sever each one at the neck!
What most people know about Caligula comes from this iconic BBC series, I, Claudius, which was based on 2 historical novels by Robert Graves. In the show, Caligula turns his palace into a brothel, makes his horse a high-ranking senator, and declares himself a living god.
For now you may address me as Zeus.
It's a torrid tale of incest, infanticide,
Don't go in there.
and imperial madness.
Help me!
But how much of that portrayal is real?
Did Caligula impregnate his sister and then eat her baby?
Caligula did not impregnate his sister and eat her baby.
Did Caligula make a horse a high-ranking senator or consul?
No, of course he didn't.
Did he turn his palace into a brothel?
No.
So where did all these ideas come from? I mean,
Yeah, well, largely from Robert Graves. You know, his I, Claudius novels are awesome. But he wasn't an academic. He was a writer.
Andrew Wallace Hadrill is an academic, a professor emeritus at the University of Cambridge, and he's closely studied the few written accounts that survive from Caligula's time.
I grew up watching I, Claudius. I love the book. I love the old TV series.
Yeah.
You're telling me a lot of that just wasn't true.
No. What I'm not denying is they had sex in the palace. Of course they had sex. Pretty spectacularly. Of course they had
Spectacularly?
But Wallace Hadrill does believe Caligula could be very impulsive and brutal, and he doesn't rule out the possibility that he may have had a severe physical or mental disorder.
I think there's a serious danger that Caligula was pathological, that he actually didn't care about the hurt he caused.
Wallace Hadrill says Robert Graves' novels were largely based on stories published around 121 AD, 80 years after Caligula's death, by Suetonius, a well-known biographer and advisor to later emperors. But Suetonius often had to rely on second-hand stories and gossip from members of the imperial court.
These members of the court, it's like staffers in the White House. It's like all those leaky people in Buckingham Palace. What are these stories worth? How can you pin them down?
Archaeology can help pin down the past, but in a city full of amazing ruins, not much directly linked to Caligula had been discovered. That is until 2006, when a pension fund for Italian doctors called NPAM started digging an underground parking garage for its new office building in the Esquilino neighborhood of Rome. In ancient times, this was one of a number of tranquil garden estates located about 10 minutes by carriage from the bustling Roman Forum. These recreations from Rome's superintendent of antiquities give some sense of the sprawling grounds and buildings enjoyed by emperors and their guests for about 4 centuries. It took archaeologists 9 years to carefully recover more than 1 million pieces of the past, while an underground parking garage and modern building was built around them. Everything found was taken to a large warehouse where it was closely analyzed, logged into a database, and when possible, painstakingly restored. The office building's completed now, and last month, Rome's newest archaeological site, the Nymphaeum Museum, opened in the basement, preserving some of the excavation and suggesting what a lush and lavish place this once was. It contains thousands of items from the 2nd century BC through the 5th century AD, like this drinking glass that somehow survived largely intact for 1,900 years. Mirella Sirlorenzi, director of excavations for the Italian Ministry of Culture, took us to a small staircase normally closed to the public and brought us to the level of the ground during Caligula's time.
And so back then, in the first century, 2,000 years ago, this was outside.
It was clearly a garden because we found in the layers traces of the roots of the plants. And in this part here, the staircase connected the various levels of the garden.
Is it possible to walk on it?
Assolutamente sì.
Yeah. Excellent.
This is what Sirlorenzi's team believes the area looked like during Caligula's reign. We ended up talking for a long time on the garden steps.
Is it right to sit down?
Sì, okay.
There was something about touching those old slabs of marble that made ancient history feel very real.
I can't believe that we were sitting on the steps that Caligula may have walked on. It's amazing.
She told us the water pipe by our feet was installed by Caligula's successor, his uncle Claudius. His name is stamped on the pipe. One of the most remarkable things about Caligula is that he lived to become emperor at all. The emperor before him, his adoptive grandfather Tiberius, was suspected of killing Caligula's father, mother, and 2 brothers. And when Caligula turned 19, he was summoned to live with Tiberius at his palace on the island of Capri. It sits high on a cliff, and it said Tiberius would have people who crossed him tossed onto the rocks below. Through some combination of flattery and deceit, Caligula managed to survive here for 6 years with the man who may have killed much of his family. He became Tiberius' successor in 37 AD. He was just 24 years old and in charge of an empire.
He was in a very, very difficult position. I like the saying of Tiberius, who says, being emperor is like having to hold a wolf by the ears. There's this sort of savage beast that can turn on you any moment.
What is so insecure about it? Was it the system itself?
You've got this enormous concentration of power and resource, wealth, concentrated on the palace in Rome. And everyone wants in on it. They are prepared to do anything to seize this power.
Back then, the Roman Empire dominated the Mediterranean world, and items found in the gardens give some sense of the riches that flowed towards Rome. Rare and intricately carved marble from the far reaches of the empire decorated the walls of the buildings. Glass recovered at the site appears to have been used in very early windows, and large amounts of oysters appear to have been served at meals. Mirella Sirlorenzi says her team recovered the bones of wild animals that would have been brought here from faraway lands. She showed us the leg of an ostrich, the foot of a lion, and the tooth of a bear.
It's evident that wild animals were here for the entertainment of the emperor. Games were carried out here with gladiators, we can imagine, and battles with ferocious beasts.
When he became emperor, Caligula started improving Rome's infrastructure. He began work on new aqueducts. He also cut taxes. Sirlorenzi says this coin found in the gardens was minted around 39 AD to remind Romans that Caligula got rid of a sales tax.
2,000 years ago, politicians were just like politicians today. If they cut taxes, they wanted everybody to know about it.
That's exactly right. The coins are a form of imperial propaganda.
But something changed as the years progressed. Suetonius says Caligula wanted to be treated as a god and connected his palace in the Roman Forum to a major temple.
That's the temple of Castor and Pollux.
Exactly. And these columns have been standing there for more than 2,000 years. They have been created in year 6.
Paolo Carafa, professor of archaeology at Sapienza University of Rome, has been studying the Roman Forum area for more than 35 years.
So, according to Suetonius, Caligula extended his house up to that temple.
Exactly.
Is that, have you found evidence of that?
Behind the temple, recent excavations have identified fragments of a large house, a luxury house.
He can't say for sure it was Caligula's house, but he says it comes from that time period, and only an emperor like Caligula would have dared do something so shocking.
He wanted the temple to be the entrance to his own house.
Which is quite unusual.
One of the things I. Claudius seems to have gotten right, Wallace Hadrill told us, was Caligula's capacity for both physical and mental cruelty.
There's no doubt that Caligula is brutal, but Suetonius says he's not only brutal, he thinks it's amusing. He takes pleasure in it.
Perhaps the most telling account comes from a contemporary of Caligula's, the philosopher Seneca, who describes how Caligula invited a father to a festive dinner on the day he'd executed the man's son.
And at the dinner, he insists that the father should have a jolly time. He plies him with wine and food. He even plies him with perfume and a garland.
On the very day his son...
On the very day. And Seneca says, people asked, how on earth could he endure to do it? And the answer is, he had a second son. And I think that anecdote just evokes the atmosphere of terror of the court of Caligula.
As I, Claudia, showed, the end came in 41 AD, when Caligula was stabbed to death by members of his own imperial guard.
He's killed by his own guardsmen, but then they haven't got a candidate.
They don't have somebody waiting to take over.
No one in the wings, except poor old Claudius.
Does that argue the point that he had to have been really awful if they were so motivated to just kill him?
Yeah. It's an assassination born of anger, humiliation, disgust. We can't take this anymore.
Long after the assassination itself, some historians believe Caligula's enemies assassinated his memory as well.
There's a number of contemporary scholars who've argued that Caligula's critics distorted his memory, that they have falsely made him out to be far worse than he was.
Of course, it's like entering a hall of mirrors, and you know some of them are concave and some are convex, and there are no flat mirrors.
But isn't that terrifying that what we think we know about history is so dependent on rumors or...
But I think it's an enormous mistake to look at the past as a series of solid rocks that are, that was definitely there and that was definitely... It's a great morass, a flowing sea. I think that ancient history is very good for people because it's got so much uncertainty in it.
But why is it good that there's a lot of misinformation?
It's good because the world we live in is full of misinformation, as we have learned spectacularly in recent years. People invent truths. You have to be skeptical.
As we prepare to leave the Nymphaeum Museum, we couldn't help thinking about how time tramples even the mightiest of empires, turning lavish gardens into underground parking lots.
What do you think Caligula would think of what's happened to his gardens?
I think he'd be in total disagreement. And I don't think he'd be very happy that we're sitting on his staircase.
Okay, name that country. It's planted opposite Europe, sitting proudly on the other side of the North Sea. It's a monarchy that features its own currency, postage stamps, constitution, national anthem, love of tea, and a pair of handsome princes born 2 years apart. We speak of Sealand, a crumb of real estate off the English coast that declared its independence in 1967. Sealand has a full-time population of 1. It has a landmass the size of roughly 2 tennis courts. Its leading export might be the national mythology, a history of piracy, coups, counter-coups, rogues, and offshore internet schemes. It may make tiny Liechtenstein look like China by comparison, but by rights, Sealand is a sovereign nation. Join us as we compile some notes from a truly small island.
We can see Sealand over there, by the way, now. You see that?
Oh, there she is.
Yeah. On the starboard bow.
Behold, the world's smallest state. It's a micronation in the extreme, a principality which sits, or stands, only 7 miles off the coast of England. Its self-described reigning monarch is this guy, Prince Michael Bates.
Here we are.
Yeah.
A platform and a couple of concrete husks, and this is a state.
Yeah.
Enter some countries, you arrive in style. Here, you arrive in what's basically a backyard swing hoisted by a crank 60 feet above the North Sea. And if you're wondering about the safety regulations, yeah, us too. Then again, when you are a sovereign nation, you, by definition, set your own rules.
That's a hell of a way to get into a country.
The only way to travel.
On the plus side, there's no long line at the arrivals hall.
I'm following you to passport control.
Mike Barrington fills various roles and positions on Sealand. Right now, it's immigration and customs. He also happens to be the only permanent resident.
There you are, sir.
So now I'm official.
You are. Welcome to Sealand.
It wasn't always named Sealand, and it was never intended to be a country. Originally called His Majesty's Ruff's Tower, it was a hastily constructed nautical fort, one of several the British set up in the North Sea during World War II.
Fire!
Equipped with anti-aircraft artillery, these forts were designed to prevent German bombing raids on London. During the war, more than 100 Royal Marines were crammed into these towers for months on end. Descending the 7-story towers, it feels and smells like a cross between a treehouse and a diesel-soaked submarine. First up, the first-class bedroom suite.
It's a nice one.
Yeah, nice TV.
Our claustrophobic tour continued downward.
Now we're underwater at this point. So we've still got a couple floors to go.
Yeah, you hear ships going past. You hear the propellers going around. Ding, 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 ding.
Like many countries, there's a national cathedral.
You have freedom of worship in Sealand. I think there's even the Quran here somewhere.
On the bottom floor, the jail.
2 days in the brig. Bread and water.
I have to look at the Sealand Constitution and see what my rights are.
Very limited at the moment.
If you're wondering by now how this concrete island constitutes a country, stick with us here.
This is Radio Caroline on 199.
Back in the 1960s, these same waters played host to the burgeoning, unlicensed commercial radio business that operated on ships and old forts, what the British government called pirate radio. It was the time of the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, the Kinks. But the stodgy BBC, which had a monopoly on broadcasting in Britain, gave the rock bands just an hour of airtime a week. The younger set in Britain, millions of them, tuned their radio knobs to the pirate stations. In 1965, Prince Michael's father, Roy Bates, an enterprising, swashbuckling World War II veteran, commandeered a fort where another pirate station operated. It was the Wild West on the North Sea.
The DJs may not be highly experienced, but they certainly pull their weight.
Bates set up Britain's first 24-hour outfit. He called it Radio Essex.
You're in tune with Radio Essex broadcasting on 222 meters.
We're doing a job that's needed. The public want us to do the job, so do businesses. And I think while this demand is here, we'll remain in business.
But not for long. The British government enacted a new law rendering all pirate radio stations illegal. Bates was forced to shut down, but true to his nature, he was something other than scared off.
He just would not back down.
Form of surrender? If he had said, you know what, I'm out?
He wouldn't know that word, surrender. I mean, no.
Far from surrendering, Bates seized another fort, Ruff's Tower, which was outside UK territorial waters. Instead of restarting Radio Essex, he did something bolder still. On September 2nd, 1967, he declared it an independent state, Sealand, and declared himself its prince. It was his wife Joan's birthday.
And it was, of course, a hugely romantic gesture to make my mother a princess.
In addition to taking you out to dinner, I'm going to make you a princess.
He didn't take her out to dinner, but he just made her a princess, yeah.
Prince Roy and Princess Joan, along with their 2 children, Michael and Penny, set up home on Sealand. The sheer novelty of their lifestyle was a constant source of amusement on the mainland. This newsreel is from 1969.
The start of another day, even for the new royals, is no different than for millions of others, the request for a common cuppa.
Mrs. Bates, how is it possible to keep looking glamorous in conditions like these?
It's no more difficult than anywhere else in the world. We're quite comfortable here. We have all the things I want. Look, makeups, brushes and things.
At age 16, Penny was less convinced.
It was freezing cold and it had no electricity.
To flush the toilet, you'd have to chuck a bucket over the side, drop it down about 80 feet, pull it up and flush the toilet.
That was your toilet?
Yes.
The Bates family had big ambitions to turn Sealand into a tax haven, a luxury island and casino. And they went all in on the trappings of statehood, fashioning a flag, stamps, currency, an anthem, even a national motto, Imare Libertas, from the sea, freedom. As teens, Michael and Penny would spend months on Sealand, holding down the fort, as it were, firing off warning shots and tossing Molotov cocktails overboard to fend off periodic attempts of invasion from rivals and buccaneers.
When the press eventually came out and took photographs, my father called me down and he said, "Now look," he said, "how many times have I told you, you do not hold a gun like that?"
You weren't holding the gun the right way.
And actually, if you look at the picture, the way I'm holding the guns is dreadful.
Firmly settled on Sealand, the Bateses remained a nuisance to the British government. So much so, as a warning to the family, a team of Royal Engineers blew up a similar North Sea fort. At Sealand's National Archives, which doubles as Prince Michael's dining room table, we were shown declassified plans drawn up by the British Ministry of Defence to take Sealand by force.
The following units are to be available to the execution of the operation. Royal Navy, 2 Wessex 5 helicopters, crafts from HM Naval Base Chatham, Portsmouth, Medway, and a clearance diving team. It's crazy, isn't it?
But it wasn't just the British government that wanted to dislodge the family. In August 1978, a band of rogue German and Dutch lawyers and diamond merchants launched a coup d'etat with designs of founding their own offshore casino. They arrived by helicopter with a film crew in tow, taking Prince Michael by surprise and then roughing him up.
They tied my elbows together, my knees together, my feet together, my hands down to my knees, and they picked me up and one says to the other in German, "Let's chuck this bastard over the side, he's too much trouble."
You're a full-on political prisoner right now.
Yeah.
Sealand had fallen. After 3 days, Michael was released. Did Michael and his father then return via helicopter, fully armed and flanked by a group of bruisers, to stage a successful counter-coup? Yes, they did.
But I jumped and landed crash in the middle of the Germans. A sawn-off shotgun hit the deck, boom, and all the Germans went like that.
They surrender. That's it. Yeah. You've reclaimed your principality.
Yep.
Disarmed, the plotters were released, all except for one. His name was Putz, and he was made to clean the bathroom, make coffee, and imposed a fine for treason, $37,000. His imprisonment brought a German diplomat to Sealand.
But if you have German emissaries coming here to try and negotiate the release of this prisoner, doesn't that imply that Sealand is a state that's having relations?
Absolutely. It's de facto recognition, isn't it? It happened, yeah.
This diplomatic visit was critical for the Bates family. An international treaty signed in the 1930s established 4 requirements for statehood. One is recognition by another state. Sealand had already met the other tests. A government, check. A defined territory, check. And a permanent population, check, thanks to Michael Barrington.
So what's your position here?
Well, I do most of the engineering work, electrically and whatever. Apparently I'm head of Homeland Security.
What are you protecting this place from?
Well, the British government or anybody else that decides to take us over. We are a country, after all, a small nation.
You're ready to use weapons if you have to?
If need be, yes. No hesitation.
But in recent years, to keep Sealand afloat, the Bates family has updated their pirate radio sensibilities for the times. In the early 2000s, they partnered with fringe internet entrepreneurs who invested millions with designs of turning Sealand into an offshore data haven. Prince Michael's son, Prince James, showed us the old server room.
We used to run things like gambling sites, porn sites. We had a few dubious people asking us to do things that we didn't really agree with. There was an organ transplant company like Human Organs that wanted to host out here, which my father was against.
Gambling and porn is okay, but we draw a line at harvesting human organs.
Yes, exactly.
That venture failed dismally. But today, James and his younger brother, Prince Liam, are still harnessing the power of the internet. The Bates family won't disclose the size of the national debt or the yearly budget, but it is serviced through the online sale of noble titles. Become a lord or lady for $30. $600 will make you a Sealand duke or duchess.
And people are buying these titles. What is that all about?
I think it means so many things to so many different people. Some people love the act of political defiance. Some people love the love story that ran through it with my grandma and grandpa. Some people love David against Goliath.
That national myth, the very idea of Sealand, has now far outgrown the country itself. As for the House of Bates, well, Roy and Joan have passed on. And the rest of the lineage lives in the small English resort town of Southend-on-Sea. Princes James and Liam run a business harvesting cockles. Princess Penny runs a Botox clinic nearby. And 7 years ago, Prince Michael married and welcomed a new princess, Mei Shi, a former artillery major in China's People's Liberation Army. 6 decades after founding their private little country, the royal family remains committed to the bit.
Is this a golden age for Sealand?
Hopefully.
If the British Navy rolled up tomorrow and said it's time to reclaim Sealand, how do you respond?
Well, first of all, I'm sure they wouldn't, but if they did, I'd just get the best china out and make them a nice cup of tea.
With extreme weather events on the rise across the globe, like the rare Category 5 hurricane that hit Mexico 11 days ago, we were interested in a study on a remote island very few people are allowed to visit, where scientists are studying how the stress of these environmental crises affects longevity and overall health. The subjects are monkeys, rhesus macaque monkeys, whose behavior has been studied there for over 80 years because 94% of their DNA is the same as humans. They survived with relative environmental stability until 6 years ago, when the island was hit with a devastating storm. After taking tests for tuberculosis, measles, and COVID, we were allowed to visit Cayo Santiago, or Monkey Island, off the coast of Puerto Rico. There are roughly 1,800 monkeys on Cayo. They live in isolation in what is a natural laboratory, halfway between captivity and the way they would live in the wild.
Are they fighting?
Yeah. She's looking around and screaming for help, trying to get others to come to her aid.
Wow. Biologist James Hyam of NYU and Noah Snyder-Mackler of Arizona State University are part of a team of investigators in this long-term research project. What's the lifespan usually?
The lifespan here on the island for the females, the median lifespan, is about 18 years, and then in males about 15 years, right?
Is there a predator? Is there any?
No predators here.
Another way life here is unlike the wild is that these guys are served their meals every morning. Researchers tell us there's a hierarchy. The highest-ranking monkeys get to eat first.
I've even seen high-ranking individuals go up to a low-ranking individual who is eating food in their mouth and hold their mouth open and take the food out of their mouths and then eat.
What do they get?
Purina monkey chow.
There's monkey chow?
Made
There
by
is.
Purina.
Yep.
Oh my goodness. Rhesus monkeys are commonly used for medical research because there are close relatives, genetically and physiologically similar to humans.
They have systems that are quite like us, eyes that are like us, lungs and hearts that are like us.
These rhesus macaque monkeys, their ancestors, came here from India in 1938.
The macaque is used in larger numbers for medical and zoological research than any other kind of primate.
American primatologist Clarence Carpenter took 500 of them on a grueling 14,000-mile sea voyage that lasted 51 days. He wanted to create a naturalistic research facility to study the monkeys' social and sexual behaviors. Their early years here were tough. Many died from disease, but enough of them lived on so that by the 1950s, scientists began tattooing them and taking a daily census. That meticulous record-keeping has continued with today's monkeys, all of whom descended from the original group, giving scientists rare access to more than 6 decades of their biological and behavioral data. One of the things they learned is that they're highly adaptable, acclimating quickly to the island. They also learned that they can be quite aggressive, especially around food and during the mating season. Are these monkeys intelligent?
Sure, they're pretty intelligent. You know, they're socially intelligent.
How similar to us are they in how they live?
They form really strong social relationships with their best friends and their family members.
They have best friends?
Some close friends, some best friends, right?
Rhesus monkeys live in female-led societies. Mothers, daughters, aunts, and grandmothers stick together in groups, while the males leave when they reach maturity and join other troops for breeding. Few people know the troop tensions and allegiances better than research assistants Daniel Phillips and Josue Negron, who've worked on Cayo for years. They arrive every morning by boat at 7 a.m., and for the next 7 hours, they document things like aggression, grooming, vigilance, and feeding. Do you ever get to know individuals? In other words, you know, that monkey versus that one?
Yeah. Yeah, we need to recognize them right away because I need to know, like, who is interacting with who, how they, like, groom each other or attack each other.
And how can you tell the difference? What are the characteristics that you see?
You can see the differences on even how they walk, how they move. Their even faces have differences.
In other words, their faces become as ordinary in a way to your eyes as human faces.
Yes. Yeah. You'll recognize even families.
Exactly.
Right? Like, your face is familiar, you should be the son of this female.
Everything changed for the research and the monkeys when Hurricane Maria slammed into Puerto Rico in September 2017. 155-mile-an-hour winds smashed into homes and office buildings, destroying everything in sight, including the power grid and communication systems. Nearly 3,000 people died. There was no way for the team to get to Monkey Island. Angelina Ruiz Lambides, the then scientific director of Cayo, 7 months pregnant at the time, sheltered in her home outside of San Juan with her husband and 2 young children. You thought the monkeys were all going to die?
We thought that the monkeys were going to die.
James Hyam and Noah Snyder-Mackler couldn't get any news about their colleagues or the monkeys. So 2 days after the storm, the team came up with an idea. And you hired a helicopter?
We hired a helicopter.
They enlisted the pilot to fly over Cayo and do a survey. And they had a list of questions.
Can he see any monkeys? Are they alive? What is the status of the vegetation? Are there standing pools of water that they might be able to drink?
Angelina, who had decided to go up with the pilot, was horrified. This is footage she shot from the helicopter.
I see this destruction, like 80-plus years of work completely flattened.
This is Cayo before the hurricane, with a dense canopy of trees and lush foliage. This is after. A green oasis turned brown, buried in dead branches. The island lost 2/3 of its vegetation. Heartbroken by what she was seeing from the air, Angelina wanted a closer look. But even on the ground, she didn't see any monkeys.
So then I get on the helicopter again.
Back up again.
And I need to look, they're here. And that's when I see a social group running from the helicopter. And it's like, oh, there's monkeys. There's still Cayo. I think I estimated, okay, that must be around like 300, 400 monkeys or so.
Out of 1,700.
Yes.
But once the staff was able to return and do a complete census on the ground, they found, to their utter astonishment, that most had lived. They estimated just about 50 had died.
And you're thinking, how could they survive this? How could they?
How could they survive this?
It's still a mystery. What did the monkeys do to ride out the storm? Where did they shelter from the wind? And what did they eat?
So one of the big questions is, without being fed, how were they nourished?
Yeah, so although the hurricane did dramatically devegetate the island, one thing it also did was deposited a great amount of seaweed and algae onto the island. And so one possibility is that the monkeys were eating more of this kind of vegetation.
Which they still seem to enjoy. After the hurricane, the monkeys had to adjust to a new, far more hostile environment. Their innate adaptability certainly helped.
So they bob up and down to try and stop themselves from falling forward.
6 years after the storm, the adjusting continues. Attempts to replant the trees have been stymied because the monkeys, ever curious about anything new in their environment, uproot them before they have a chance to grow. So now there's very little shade.
This used to be almost forested, right?
Lots of space and shade. And many
now
monkeys...
they're forced to sit in a few shaded areas, and so they've been clumped by the changing distribution of shade. So an interesting thing that we saw is that individuals became more social.
Not just more social. The researchers have noticed that the monkeys are more tolerant of each other, which at first seemed counterintuitive.
I'm thinking of humans in a situation where there's fewer resources. And I see in my mind's eye competition. I see them saying, get off my property or whatever. But you're saying that it was the opposite here.
Perhaps, but there's also famous examples of people pulling together.
Yeah.
So I think it can go both ways. We're capable of great greed and competition and cruelty, but humans are also capable of great kindness and compassion and friendship and generosity. And that kind of duality exists in rhesus macaque societies too.
And I think anyone you talk to here in Puerto Rico would bring up the fact that the people of Puerto Rico sort of gelled and increased their support of one another in the face of this event.
Beyond observing their social interactions, they were also able to track biological changes since they had access to blood tests done on the monkeys for 13 years.
So what we found is that individuals who had lived through the hurricane had immune systems that looked like they had aged an extra 2 years.
What is that in human years?
It's 6 to 8 human years.
They aged 6 to 8 years?
They aged 6 to 8 human years.
Oh my gosh. Through the trauma.
That was on average. That's the work that we're trying to do right now, is what makes some of these individuals more resilient to the hurricane, right?
Is the hypothesis that it has something to do with friendships?
We think that those individuals who were able to have stronger bonds, stronger friendships, might have been protected from this really stressful event.
The hurricane opened all new avenues of their research, with questions such as what predicts who survives a catastrophe like an earthquake or a hurricane, and how quickly they recover.
So when you step back and look at your study in terms of climate-related trauma or any kind of trauma, are you expecting to find answers for survivability in these situations for human beings?
Given the strong similarity between these primates, these monkeys, and us, we know that a lot of the work that we're doing and the things that they might do to, be more resilient to this might be translatable to humans, to us, and might provide ways for us to intervene and help buffer against the negative effects of these traumatic events.
If faith is a mystery, there are few places in the Christian world where the mystery is deeper than in Lalibela. 800 years ago, an Ethiopian king ordered a new capital for Christians. At 8,000 feet on the central plateau of Ethiopia stand 11 churches, each carved from a single gigantic block of stone. No bricks, no mortar, no concrete, no lumber, just rock, sculpted into architecture. Not much is known about who built them or why, but the faithful of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church say there's no mystery, really. The churches of Lalibela were built by angels.
The northern highlands of Ethiopia rose 31 million years ago when fissures in the earth flooded the Horn of Africa with lava a mile deep. On hillsides, you can still see columns of lava frozen in time. Iron made the basalt red, and gases trapped inside made the stone light and pliable as air. Christians laid their mark on Ethiopia before the year 400. They found the ancient stone welcomed the bite of a chisel. The churches were carved around the year 1200 by people called the Zagwe. Their king, Lalibela, is said to have traveled the 1,600 miles to Jerusalem. Legend has it, when he returned and Jerusalem fell to the Islamic conquest, Lalibela ordered a new home for Christianity.
And he came back with an ambitious idea or vision of creating an African Jerusalem, a black Jerusalem here in the highlands of Ethiopia.
Fazil Georgis is an Ethiopian architect and historian who walked us through the Rock of Ages.
Well, there are 3 groups of churches, and each group is interconnected within itself.
We're sitting in St. Mary's Church.
Yes.
How was it built?
Well, it was built starting from outside. They formed the shape, and then they start digging, or let's say excavating downwards.
So they dug essentially a trench around the whole perimeter,
yes,
which left them with a giant cube of solid rock.
Exactly.
And then they carved their doors, and in they went?
In they went.
Chipping inside, largely in darkness, artists sculpted many rooms with no room for error. Archways, vaults, and columns imitate traditional construction, even though in solid rock there's no need to hold up the ceiling. The enduring mystery is why. Why did King Lalibela attempt the seemingly impossible when easier building techniques were known? As the story goes, he was helped by angels.
Yes.
Who worked on the project overnight.
I think I would rather take this as a symbolic thing. Because...
Do you not have any experience working with angels in architecture?
Well, I get inspiration from angels.
The site of the 11 churches covers about 62 acres. It's divided by a stream King Lalibela christened the River Jordan. The largest church covers around 8,000 square feet. Each is about 4 stories tall. But their most astounding dimension cannot be measured. It is the length to which they summon adoration.
This is considered to be a holy place. That coming here as a devout Christian is a very strong sign of their belief. Some people travel hundreds of kilometers to get here, on foot, and they have been doing it for several centuries.
The churches are open for worship year-round, but we were there Christmas Eve when nearly 200,000 pilgrims rose to heaven on a path descending into the earth. Many walked for days or weeks, fasting, robed in white. An ordeal that is rinsed from the disciples in the tradition of Jesus. Any Ethiopian over the age of 30 cannot forget the suffering of drought and war and 1 million people lost to starvation. And so, having known poverty in this life, they've invested their souls in the next. Tawalda Yigzao told us, "I believe God is here. I came with faith." Her neighbor, Gaitier Ababao, and his daughter told us they walked from their farms nearly 100 miles away, a journey of 3 days. God can hear your prayers anywhere. Why did you feel you had to be here? So that God can see our devotion, she said, and our dedication. We were very tired, he said. We were falling and getting back up throughout the journey, all to see the celebration here. And God will recognize our effort. The Christmas celebration Ethiopians call Gena compresses them shoulder to shoulder to fast and chant and praise all night till dawn brings Christmas Day. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church claims to be among the earliest capitals of Christianity, thanks to a mysterious figure of the Hebrew Bible. The faithful believe that the Queen of Sheba left Ethiopia, went to Jerusalem, where she met King Solomon. From that meeting came a son. And when the son was an adult, he returned to Ethiopia with 12,000 Israelites and the Ark of the Covenant, containing the tablets with the Word of God, the 10 Commandments. And the Ark remains in Ethiopia, according to the priests of the Orthodox Church. We met Tage Saleh Mazgabu, the head priest of Lalibela, at the Church of St. George, which was last to be built and judged to be the masterpiece. I met a woman on Christmas Day who had spent 3 days walking here. Who are these pilgrims? These are believers, he told us, not just 3 days, even 3 months sometimes. When there was no air travel or buses, people used to travel from various parts of the country for months to come here and celebrate with us. The celebration beats to the rhythm of ancient instruments, the cabero, double-headed drum, and a rattle called the sistrum, whose sound was known in North Africa 3,000 years before Jesus. On Christmas Eve, we watched you and your priests lead the chant all night long. What are you saying in that chant? We tell the people that God became human and a human became God. Because of Christ, we went from being punished by God to being his children again. Christmas is the day that forgiveness was born. But while God forgives, time does not. After 8 centuries, the basalt basilicas are weary of wind and water.
What's absolutely clear is that something quite miraculous happened here.
Stephen Battle is an architect with the World Monuments Fund, who told us Lalibela's miracle is being undermined because the rock is not rock solid.
When you're building a conventional building, you go to a quarry, and you'll have different grades of stone, and you try and select the best stone and leave the bad stuff behind. When you're carving a church out of the mountainside, you don't have that luxury. And so typically in any one of the churches here, you get good stone, and a lot of it is good stone, but then you also get actually bad stone and actually very bad stone, which is really very soft indeed. And over time, if you touch it, it actually crumbles.
And this is one of the most sacred parts of Lalibela.
We saw the good and the bad in the chamber where King Lalibela is laid to rest. This is one of the best preserved sculptures I've seen at Lalibela.
Yes, this is particularly beautiful, and they're also painted.
Simon Warwick is a master stonemason, also with the World Monuments Fund. a U.S.-based charity that preserves some of humankind's great achievements.
So obviously, we worked on the roof first.
Warwick has repaired European cathedrals and Roman antiquities, but Lalibela is more complicated because of the sincere belief that angels worked this stone. Simon, you can't actually cut this stone in order to fit a new piece in because the stone you would be cutting is sacred.
Yeah, this was one of the first big issues that I came across. If we ever had to drill a hole to strengthen it, to put in a pin, we had to discuss it with the priests. They collected the dust. There was a whole procedure around touching the fabric of the church.
The priest collected the dust?
Yes, yes.
That was the issue when Warwick was asked to resurrect the cross in this window without disturbing the fragment that remained. So this cross wasn't here?
Completely gone, yes. There was a very, very thin piece of stone remaining. And so I hollowed out the back of the cross shape that we were inserting so that it was fitting over the original stone, a bit like a dentist. And so we were able to conserve this tiny bit of stone, which is, I mean, stonemasonry terms, it's crazy. But you have to do that in this kind of situation.
There have been other crazy conservation ideas. A dozen years ago, 5 umbrellas were built to keep the heavens from pouring down.
The local people call them gas station roofs. And I think it's a pretty apt way of describing them. So you can imagine we have this extraordinary site with some of the most beautiful buildings in the world, with extraordinary, huge spiritual significance. And there's a bunch of gas station roofs that have been placed over the top of them. It's really not compatible, it's not appropriate.
Unholy to behold, the roofs became a lesson in the law of unintended consequences. The churches were too wet, now they're too dry. For the first time in 900 years, they're not being rained on.
Exactly right. And so the stone is contracting much more than it has ever done before. And what happens is this creates little failures on a micro level, and the stone starts to crumble.
The roofs were meant to be temporary, and in a few years, they must be recovered. Stephen Battle prays they'll be removed altogether and replaced by intensive maintenance. To that end, the World Monuments Fund is teaching conservation to dozens of Lalibela's priests and laymen in the hope that a host can protect the heavenly, perhaps for centuries to come. How long can they last?
Well, another 900 years if they're looked after properly. Oh yes, we're beyond a shadow of a doubt, absolutely, if they're looked after correctly.
Even beyond another millennia, we're not likely to know with certainty the answer to why. Why attempt what must have seemed impossible? No answer was apparent until we chipped away at what we saw Christmas Day. In the Old Testament, Isaiah advises those who seek God to look to the rock from which you were cut and the quarry from which you were hewn. Whoever cut this rock, angels or man, understood that in the presence of a miracle, faith is never washed away.